So yeah, we're now recording. So I think we're going to kick off with some information about the Preston Capes Conservation Area itself. And for that, I'll hand over to Anna. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Rhiann. Just trying to get the slides to move on. There we go. Right, so just to start then, the District Council has a statutory duty to undertake conservation area reviews, both of its existing conservation areas, as well as exploring the possibility of new designations. So a district-wide review is currently underway, and that obviously includes looking at Preston Capes conservation area. Conservation areas form some of the most architecturally and historically interesting settlements in the district, and Preston Cape certainly comes into that category. It was first designated as a conservation area in 1976, and it was last reviewed in 2000. So in Preston Capes' case, it's 20 years since the last review, and therefore it's a good opportunity now to have a look at the current boundary to see if it's fit for purpose, or to see if there are any areas that have changed during that time, which means they no longer merit being included within the conservation area. As part of the review, we've also looked at whether there are areas of the village that are now considered to be worth including in the conservation area, and therefore whether the boundary should be extended. As well as reviewing the boundary, we've also produced a draft conservation area appraisal and management plan, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail later on. So conservation areas are areas of special architectural or historic interest, and they're designated by local planning authorities through the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990. There are actually over 10,000 conservation areas which have been designated nationwide since they were first created in 1967 as part of the Civic Amenities Act. Conservation areas have been designated over many different types of area, and they can include residential areas, industrial areas, commercial and landscape areas. And they vary in size from just a handful of buildings to many hectares of countryside as well. Because they cover lots of different types of area, their character is created and influenced by many different factors, and this can include the type of land use, the age of buildings, the consistent use of open spaces, the use of particular building materials or styles, or the impact of fortuitous or purposeful design. Conservation area status does introduce some additional planning controls, and those have the purpose of seeking to enhance or preserve the character or appearance of the area, and we'll go through what those planning controls are in a minute or two. So in terms of Preston Capes Conservation Area, its character is influenced by a number of different factors. These include the significant age of many of its buildings, which largely date to between the 17th and 19th centuries. There's also evidence of its historic village layout, including the surrounding areas of archaeological interest, such as the 11th century Motte and Bailey Castle on Castle Hill. There's also the consistent use of vernacular building materials, both for dwellings and boundary treatments, such as the ironstone, slate roof tiles and thatch. And the landscape also plays an important part in its character, with the village being located on a ridge of high ground, which from a strategic point of view would have made it a good location for the medieval castle, which then led on to the development of the village. And finally as well, open spaces are an important part of its character, particularly the churchyard, which gives these wonderful panoramic views to the north of the village and views of Churchwood to the northwest. So in terms of the planning controls that conservation area status brings with it, they include the demolition of buildings, development works including building or demolishing walls, gates or fences, cladding, alterations to roofing, side and rear extensions, outbuildings, and installing radio antennae and satellite dishes in particular locations. There are also controls over works to trees over a particular size, although for trees there's a notification process rather than having to apply for planning permission. So if anyone's intending to carry out works to trees in the conservation area, they need to give 6 weeks notification to the council before those works take place. And planning applications that come in that involve those sorts of works are determined with reference to published guidance and any other material considerations, such as an adopted conservation area appraisal. So I've just put up a map of Preston Capes conservation area, and this shows the current boundary, which was adopted in 2000, and that's the area marked in the pale pink on the map. The buildings marked in red are listed buildings, and the darker pink area, sort of at the top end of the village, that's the Castle Earthworks, and those are designated as a scheduled monument. So the current boundary includes the historic buildings, the Castle Earthworks, and the historic street pattern of High Street, Old Forge Lane and Church Way, and the small green at the junction of Church Way and Old Forge Lane. As a result of the current review that we're carrying out, we're proposing several changes to the boundary, which is shown on this map. So again, the pink area shows the current boundary, but we've added the blue areas in to indicate areas where we're proposing to extend the boundary. So if I just run through those blue areas that are labelled there. So BA1, it's actually a substantial earthwork bank on the north side of what was previously an oval enclosure. The enclosure itself is depicted on a 1742 estate map, but it's likely to be much older in origin. The interior of the enclosure is already within the conservation area, and the earthwork bank is an archaeological feature that's integral to the enclosure, and therefore it should also be included in the conservation area. And it can clearly be seen as a visible earthwork when you're looking southwest from the churchyard. Moving on to areas BA 2 and 3, these are two fields to the north of the church, which contain a number of trees that give the area its parkland character. The field boundaries reflect those that are depicted on the 1742 estate map, but they may date back to the mid-1600s when the area was first enclosed from the medieval open field system. And the open nature of this land is really important in enabling those panoramic views from the churchyard over the open countryside to the north of the village. BA4, down at the bottom of the map, is an area of pasture on the north side of Charwelton Road. And within this area, there's some archaeological earthworks, including a hollow way, which is like a sunken trackway, and possible house platforms. And this suggests that this area is an area of possible medieval shrunken settlement. And the earthworks, which are visible from a public footpath that runs between Charwelton Road and Orchard House contribute to that sort of sense of age of the village and how it's developed over time. And finally, BA5, just down at the very bottom of the map there, the current conservation area boundary cuts off the southeast corner of the garden of Swan Farmhouse, and it's maybe due to the plot having been extended since the conservation area was first designated. But for completeness and to avoid any ambiguity about where the boundary lies on the ground, it's proposed to amend it so that it includes the whole garden. So those are the changes that we're proposing as part of the review, and the full details of those are included in the appraisal and management plan document. I'm going to hand back to Rhiannon now, who's going to talk a little bit about the appraisal and the management plan.
Thanks, Anna. So yes, as Anna noted, the information about the proposed boundary changes are in the conservation area appraisal that is on our website, and but conservation area appraisals generally are used because they can contain a wealth of information about conservation areas, and they can express the special interest of a conservation area and identify what it is about those areas that are important. As well as highlighting areas that could potentially benefit from enhancement, or potentially also any threats to the character of that conservation area. Conservation areas, like across the district and across the country, can often vary, as we've also already mentioned. They can be residential, commercial, industrial, and alongside that, the conservation area appraisals that cover those areas can also vary, depending on the type of conservation area that they're looking at and also the authority that's producing them. Generally, most conservation area appraisals contain an analysis of the development of the area and how it has come to be how it is, and they also generally talk about the architectural style of a conservation area, and the buildings, their types and styles, the materials that are used in their construction, because the designation of conservation areas is usually based on its historic or architectural interest. So our conservation areas contain an analysis of both the historic development and the architectural interest of conservation areas, but we also include information about various spatial elements. So this includes an analysis of important views within the conservation area, the contribution of open spaces both around and within the conservation area. And these both can contribute very positively to how the conservation area is experienced as you move around it, as you view it from the outside, or how you view the outside from within the conservation area. And we also look at aspects of the public realm, such as street furniture, whether there are any aspects of the public realm, for example, that may detract from a conservation area's character and could potentially be enhanced in the future. And we also look at things like footpaths and how historic modes of movement can contribute to the experience of a conservation area, whether that be because of boundary treatments or how they allow us to experience views and open spaces, for example. Can I have the next slide, please, Anna? So our appraisals at Daventry District Council are usually adopted as supplementary planning documents. So that means that once adopted, they become a material consideration in the determination of planning decisions. The importance of the conservation area appraisals is that they are a place, as I've said, where we can identify what is most important about a conservation area, what the really positive features of it are, and therefore that helps both applicants and decision makers to steer development proposals so that they are sensitive to the historic environment, sensitive to those aspects of conservation areas that are positive. And when planning decisions are being made, the conservation area appraisals are used alongside national and local policy. And also what's called the development plan, which in Daventry District Council we have our settlement and countrysides Part 2 local plan, and also a number of neighbourhood plans as well. So a conservation area in terms of its conservation area appraisal, sorry, in terms of its weight, sits just below the development plan, alongside other supplementary planning documents like village design statements, for example, and they all are used together in order to come to balanced planning decisions. Could I have the next slide, please, Anna? Part of our work with the conservation area appraisals is looking at the formation of the local list. So Daventry District Council holds a local list of historic properties and sites, and local lists play a really important role in building and reinforcing the sense of local character and distinctiveness in the historic environment, and they sit alongside conservation areas and other types of designation like listed buildings and scheduled monuments. But local lists are non-statutory, so they aren't made through legislation. Effectively what they do is, once a property or a site is adopted onto a local list, then there is specific national and local policy that applies to those properties or sites. They're often termed non-designated heritage assets, and in the determination of planning decisions, any applications that would affect the special interest or significance of sites or properties on the local list, the proposals are determined with reference to the policy that applies to non-designated heritage assets. So it allows us to identify places that are particularly locally special, and then to proportionately protect their significance in the planning system. So as I mentioned, they're non-statutory, and generally things that are added to the local list are buildings and sites that are unlikely to reach the level of statutory designation, so they're unlikely to become a listed building or a scheduled monument, for example. And therefore adding them to the local list is an important way of recognising their value, where otherwise they might go unrecognised. And as part of this, we make proposals for properties or sites to be added to the local list in the conservation area appraisals, and they are assessed against criteria, objective criteria that has been formulated and adopted by the District Council. And if the candidates within the appraisal are agreed to be taken forward, then they are adopted as part of the conservation area appraisal process alongside the appraisal document by the District Council. Local people can nominate properties to the local list or sites. So if they look at the conservation area appraisal and they feel that there are properties or sites that haven't been nominated, then they can put those forward to us, and then they can be objectively assessed against the criteria. And if they're found to be merit-worthy and they meet the threshold for the criteria, then they will be taken forward and put onto the local list alongside those properties and sites that have been previously proposed. Can I have the next slide, please, Anna? So within conservation areas, there are certain planning controls that we've spoken a bit about earlier, but there are still quite a lot of different types of minor development generally domestic alterations and extensions, which can normally be undertaken without the need for planning permission, and this is under the provisions of the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order, and they are generally termed permitted development rights. So Article 4 of that order allows the local authority to limit what permitted development rights are available within conservation areas, where it's considered necessary to protect local amenity and the historic environment and well-being of an area. So they're very commonly used in conservation areas, and it means that using those provisions of Article 4, we can bring certain types of development back under the control of the local planning authority, so that potentially harmful proposals can be considered on a case-by-case basis through planning applications. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're there to stop development happening. It just means that it's there to encourage the preservation of positive features that contribute to the character and appearance of the conservation area, and to steer potentially harmful proposals so that they are then sensitive to that local character. We propose Article 4 directions in the conservation area appraisals as part of the process, and we then take that forward if it's considered that it should be explored further after the adoption of the conservation area appraisal. So it's a separate process. They don't come into force as a result of the adoption of the conservation area or the appraisal. It would then be a separate consultation process specifically for Article 4 directions that would have to take place after the adoption. Rather than them coming into force directly as a result of the adoption of the conservation area. Can I have the next slide, please, Anna? Thank you. So we're currently in the consultation period and consulting on the draft appraisal and the proposed boundary for Preston Capes Conservation Area. The consultation is running for 8 weeks, so it will run until 5 p.m. on the 18th of January. The consultation documents are all available to view online, so you can go onto our website and find them on our conservation areas webpage. Alternatively, if you would prefer a hard copy, we can post a hard copy to anybody during the consultation period free of charge, and our address will be available at the end, and also our email, so you can request a hard copy via either of those. If anyone would like to make comments on any of the draft, either the draft appraisal or the draft boundary, then you can comment online, either by emailing us, or if you go to our website on the conservation areas webpage, there is an online survey that you can fill out. Or alternatively, you can send your comments to us via post. That address will be available, as I said, at the end, or you can find it on our website as well. The dates are just at the bottom there, and I think we're going to, yeah, can I have the next slide, please, Anna? Sorry, thank you. That's great. So once the consultation period is finished, all of the comments that come into us during the consultation period in writing are compiled into a report, and that report details the comments and then our officer response and any subsequent action that results from those comments. So any potential changes, for example, to either the conservation area appraisal itself or the proposed boundary. And that report is then presented to the members of the District Council, who make a decision as to whether to adopt the appraisal and the new boundary. Once the decision has been made, all of the homes within the conservation area boundary are notified of the decision by post, and the conservation area planning controls then apply to all of the properties within the designated conservation area. The next slide, please, Anna. Thank you. So here are our consultation details. So as I said, the consultation runs until 5 p.m. on the 18th of January 2021, and all comments must be submitted in writing by that date to either our heritage email, which you can see there, or you can send it in via post as well to our heritage policy officer, and there's our address. And the online survey and all of the consultation documents are available for viewing on our website, and that's the website just at the bottom there. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this presentation will be recorded and put on our website, on our conservation areas webpage. So if you'd like to either revisit the presentation, or if you'd like to come back and get the link or that address, you're welcome to. We expect that this will be uploaded to the website by the end of the week. So I think that's it for the presentation. We're just going to move on to our questions. I think we had a question that's submitted in advance, which I think Anna's going to take us through. And then we will, once we've done that, we will open it up to see if anybody in the meeting has any questions. So I'll hand over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the question that came in, I'll just read it out and then I'll provide an answer. So the question was, we would like to ask if the extension to the conservation area on the southern side of the village could also include the field abutting Hall Farmhouse and Barns between Old Forge Lane and Charwelton Road. If it's not included within the conservation area, it would be hard to resist a housing development there. In future, any developer could easily argue that it is within the confines of the village, and the presence of the four former council houses helps that argument. And the developer would then ask the question, when the local planning authority had the opportunity to include this area in the conservation area, why didn't they take it? So the first thing to say is that conservation area status doesn't necessarily prevent development from taking place. The aim of the conservation area status is not to halt development, but rather to ensure that if it does take place, it's done in a way that preserves and enhances the character of the conservation area. When we consider areas for inclusion in the conservation area, we have to be able to justify their inclusion in terms of the contribution they make due to their architectural or historic interest. So, for example, the area of land that's immediately to the east has within it the archaeological earthworks, which contribute to our understanding of the development of the village's layout. And they're a visible link with its history. But in the case of the piece of land that we're talking about here, neither the architectural or historic interest really applies. We can sometimes include open spaces for the contribution that they make to the setting of the conservation area, but this usually includes things like important views across land towards the conservation area. And although there are glimpses of Hall Farmhouse and Barns from Charwelton Road, there is quite a tall hedge along that boundary, which prevents sort of more open views. As a part of the appraisal process, we carry out something called an open space analysis, which looks at the contribution that open spaces make to the character and appearance of the conservation area. And we do this through field work and also secondary sources of information such as historic mapping. And we assess whether a particular piece of open space makes a significant, a moderate or a negligible contribution. So this particular field that we're talking about has been identified in the appraisal as making a moderate contribution, and that's something that would be taken into account in determining any planning application in this area. In terms of the village confines, they are usually drawn around the main built form of the village, and I've spoken to colleagues in the council's planning policy team, and based on the criteria for village confines, they wouldn't consider the semi-detached houses on Charwelton Road to be within the confines, and therefore neither would the field, the open space in question. So if the area is considered to be outside of the village confines, there are several policies in the settlements and countryside local plan that deal with development in the open countryside, and those policies would be applied in determining any planning application on that parcel of land. So I hope that explains why that particular area of land hasn't been included in the boundary proposals.
Thanks, Anna.
Okay.
So we do have some time, so I'll just open it up in case anybody has any questions for us now. If you prefer not to ask questions in this forum, which is obviously completely fine, then you are more than welcome to send in questions to our heritage email, or alternatively you can contact the Planning Policy Department by phone as well. You can get the telephone number off our website. Would anybody like to ask any questions at this time? I think you should be able to unmute yourself just in case if anyone is having any issues, then they can pop it in the chat box alternatively.
Unmute.
Oh, hello.
Hi, it's Roger from Roger Jenkins from Swan Farm.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for all your work. Anyway, you've done a terrific amount of work to come up with this proposal, so sort of appreciate that. Just to recognise something, that in that little corner that is designated as new conservation area for Swan Farm, there is actually a gateway in that hedge line, so you might not have noticed that in sort of the surveying it. So just want to bring that to your attention should I might want to open that in the future. It might be subject to of course permissions and things like that. And then so that's great, consider yourselves informed. Thank you. And then in terms of building then in a conservation area, how does a building in the conservation area, how does the approval for that differ from building a house that is not within that conservation area?
Shall I take this one?
Yeah.
Anna?
Yeah.
So thanks, Anna. Yeah, it's a good question. Effectively, the process of building a new property would always require planning permission. So if it's the development of a completely new house, then the process would be the same as going through a planning application to build, in terms of the process of it, whether it was within or without a conservation area. The difference being that there are certain legislation that the decision makers would have to take into account. So the duty of the council to preserve and enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area. So in the first instance, any new development would have to adhere to that, and that would be part of the planning decision process. That generally means that there are certain pathways that have to be kind of followed with regards to types of materials or potential styles of architecture that would be sensitive to the existing character of the conservation area. So for example, we spoke a little bit about the types of materials that are used in Preston Capes, like the ironstone and the slate, for example. The planning officer or case officer who's dealing with that application would be looking to, as I said in the first instance, preserve and enhance the character of the conservation area through that design. It might also be that the property in question would have to take account of established views that we've already spoken about, or potentially areas of archaeological importance. And the relevant information, that's why we produce conservation area appraisals effectively, because the relevant information is then assimilated into a document. They're obviously not always all encompassing, because there's potentially new information that could come to light, but it means that a good deal of information about the identified aspects of a conservation area that contribute to its positive character are in there. And the development would have to take account of those aspects, as an adopted conservation area appraisal is a material consideration, so it has to be taken into account, the information within it, in determining a planning application. There are then specific, once a property is has been built, then there are specific things within a conservation area that require planning permission that elsewhere don't, as we spoke about a little bit at the beginning of the presentation about the conservation area appraisal planning regulations. So once a property is built, that's how the planning regulations would work. But that's the kind of basic process. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. But I sort of don't have a vested interest in this. But as a perspective, then the land that was referred to by Anna previously in terms of the whole farm field, which is to the direction to the west of the conservation area that just newly applied. If you look, so behind the council houses,
yes,
so north of Charlton Road. So you have a potential for a new development in the conservation area on the right as you're looking north across the boundary, and new development in the fields to the west. So those two developments would be subject to different regulations or different requirements, just because they're I don't know, separated by a hedge.
So on the ground, if we're talking about completely new development, then due to the proximity of the area to the west, for example, the area, if the conservation area were adopted how it is proposed in the current draft appraisal, with that area of archaeological earthworks being then within the conservation area, so the part that wouldn't be to the west, due to the proximity of that area to the conservation area, then there would still be a duty for the decision maker to look at preserving and enhancing the character and appearance of the conservation area because of a thing that's called setting. The conservation area as a designation has what's called a setting. That's why we look at things like important views in and out and that sort of thing, and open space analysis. And in determining the planning decisions, if there were a development proposal affecting that land, then any decision maker would have to take into account the potential impact of new development on the character and appearance of the conservation area. In terms of policy, there are slightly different policy restrictions, purely because of local policy. We have some local policies that are specific to conservation areas. However, there is quite stringent local policy that Anna already talked about that particular piece of land being in what's termed the open countryside. So the conservation area itself, as Anna said, has to have an historic or architectural interest for the areas that we propose to be considered to be justified to be included in a conservation area. But that doesn't mean that then all of the kind of land around it that's outside the conservation area is necessarily up for grabs. Any decision would be taken, a balanced judgment would be taken on all of the kind of factors taken together, but that would include its proximity to a conservation area and that duty to preserve and enhance the character of conservation areas and their settings.
Okay, that's good for me, because it means that the conservation area, the impact of that is greater than the area actually shown on the map, on the ground map, effectively, isn't it? You know, you've got a discrete boundary, but actually developments outside of that boundary can be impacted by the fact that there's a conservation boundary within, say, 50 metres of it?
Yeah, certainly. So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I was quite interested, if I could take one more, if you could take
Yeah, of
one
course.
perspective from me. Local listing, this is a new thing to me. Has this been around for a long time? And I sort of haven't, it's a sort of thing where you can locally list something, but there's no constraint on or control of it.
Yes, so local lists have been around for a number of years. They are because they are, it's up to the local authority effectively to explore and add things to their own local list, and they can be quite resource intensive. So they aren't something that every single local authority has, but they are certainly encouraged both by government and by advisory bodies such as Historic England, for example, because of the significance of local heritage that can sometimes be overlooked, where local heritage makes a positive contribution but wouldn't necessarily be of high enough significance to merit statutory listing or scheduling. So it's something that we've been looking at for a number of years as part of our conservation area appraisal process, and we're effectively going through it conservation area by conservation area, which is quite a common approach, and then that can then be taken forward so that local listing properties or sites can be taken into account in the planning system. Ooh. Don't know whether we've had a bit of a technological glitch there, possibly. Not sure. Were there any other questions from any other attendants at all whilst we're here?
Not from me, but thank you very much for the presentation and all the work you've done.
Thank you very much. That's greatly appreciated. Thank you. I don't know.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Apologies there, I got bombed out.
That's okay.
Preston Cape's internet got me out. So thanks. Sorry, Luke. Thanks very much for that. So the local lists then of properties, are they then still subject to listed consent, effectively, if you wanted to do something to that?
So local properties on the local list, it's a non-statutory list, so there aren't it's not like a listed building. You don't have to get listed building consent to make alterations. If they're within a conservation area, then the conservation area planning regulations apply, but otherwise there isn't any separate consent process. All there is some slightly different policy. So because local list properties and sites have been identified as having a particular special interest that merits a slightly different application of policy compared to the kind of other parts of the historic environment that might have a lower interest, for example, then there is separate policy for what I termed non-designated heritage assets earlier, so that they can be protected when planning decisions come in, planning applications come in, that could affect their special interest.
Okay, that's very clear for me. End of my suite of questions. Thanks very much, Rhian. Thanks very much, Anna.
No, not at all. Thank you. Yeah, thank you both for attending tonight, and I don't think we've got any other questions, so I think we'll finish there. As I mentioned before, the consultation will run until 5 p.m. on the 18th January. If you'd like to submit any comments, then please do so, and I'd like to thank Anna as well for her help this evening, and we'll wish you a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.